There have been times in the past where I've had to apply some really good batch sewing and fast sewing skills, especially when I've got a deadline, and I thought I'll spill everything I know about sewing fast and batch sewing in this video. So if you're ready, I'm ready. Let's go. Hello, my name is Juliet Uzor of SewNatural.com, a place where we work together to demystify the art of sewing. So hit the like button and let's jump right into these fantastic tips and tricks. Okay, so apart from the generic put your phone down or switch your phone off or put it upside down in order not to get distracted by notifications, which is a very good tip, by the way. There's also the tip of read the instructions so you know what's coming up. That's also good. But then if you already know what you're doing and you're ready to get going, but you want even more in-depth tips, I'll really recommend limiting the amount of times you have to pin. I know it's a bit controversial because sewing pattern instructions always say, oh, pin your seams together. But if you want to be faster and if you're batching your projects, then I would really recommend limiting the amount of times that you pin your fabrics together. I have a video where I shared all my tips and tricks on how to sew without pins or clips, and I have a link to it in the description box below. And this is my next tip. Use a swivel chair. A chair that would enable you to move from one part of your sewing table to the other. With the overlocker on this side, the sewing machine on that side, just swivel, go over to this part and swivel to the other part. So cool. When I got my swivel chair, things just kind of changed for me because, you know, I'd always used a basic chair, but when I got my swivel chair, it just makes things much faster. I'm sure you can relate. This next one is very, it's logical. Batch everything together. So you cut together, you interface together, you iron at the same time, you sew seams at the same time, you clip things, you trim threads together. These are efficient and it helps you to limit the amount of times you move from one port to the other. So if you're cutting, you cut everything at the same time and then you have them ready to be sewn together. And I would really recommend this. What I tend to do is I try to limit the amount of time I'd have to go to the ironing board, because that eats into your sewing time or your creation time. So what I do is I stitch all the seams of all the different parts, and then I take things over to the ironing board and I press, and I go back to I do things in batches, and it really does help. The next thing to do is to chain stitch. So rather than cutting into the thread when you get to the end of a seam, you put the other seam through the sewing machine and you carry on, and you just keep doing that, and then you can do your trimming of threads afterwards. I have mentioned this next tip so many times, which is to tackle smaller parts in sections before assembling the entire garment. And what I mean by this is something like, if you've got ruffles on a sleeve, attach the ruffles onto the sleeves before you attach the sleeves to the whole garment. Or if you've got a collar, attach the collar to the bodice or the shirt, whatever it is, before then putting the sleeves onto the shirt. It helps to limit or to reduce the bulk of the fabric you're working with, and it just makes things much easier for you. So I'd really recommend that tip. When I learned about flat construction, things just changed. And when I say flat construction, I actually mean attaching the shoulder seams and then inserting your sleeves onto your bodice without doing all of the, finishing off the seam of the sleeve and then fitting it into the round armhole. Rather than doing that, just have them nice and flat on the table, attach your sleeve to the bodice, and then when you finish, you can assemble them together into a whole garment. Flat construction really did change my sewing game. I would really recommend it. However, there are times when you might want to stay away from that, especially when you're constructing a wool coat. There you would have to steam the sleeve cap into place. There are certain couture garments that will not really work with flat construction, but most garments that we create for ourselves for everyday use, flat construction's fine. I would really recommend it. I really love scissors. I have loads and loads of scissors, even though I've started to give away some of them to family members who took up sewing during lockdown. Until I discovered the speed that rotary cutters give you. Rotary cutters really do speed up the cutting process because they're much faster, and it enables you to cut through lots of layers at the same time if your fabric isn't as thick as, you know, wool, denim, that type of thing. And change your blades as often as possible. It also helps if your sewing station is organized in a way that it enables you to go from one station to the other and to the other. I watched this video by a lady called Mel, I think her name is Mel, and she's here on YouTube, and she showed how she organized her sewing space for productivity, and I really love that video because she does quilting, and with quilting things have to be in a certain order in order not to get confused and not to get things mixed up, and I really enjoy that video. I know this is just something that you think, yeah, everyone knows it, but not a lot of people know that. It really does help to have at least 2 full bobbins on standby. So if you have spare bobbins, it helps if you have them all wound up, especially if you're working on a whole garment like a coat, a jacket that would use up a lot of thread, because there's nothing as annoying as getting to the sweet part of sewing a garment and realizing that you've sewn a whole stretch without bobbin thread in your sewing machine. And it also limits the amount of time that you stop and start and stop and start to wind up the bobbin. So yeah, have some spare ones nice and full, ready to go. Yeah, I really recommend sewing a lot. So lots of practice makes for faster. I have my top tips here for sewing in a straight line, and I hope to see you over at that video. Enjoy the rest of your day and all the very best. Take care. Bye.